Hi, everyone. Here we are today at Fear to Freedom. I am the CEO and team leader here at Fear to Freedom, and we have a very special guest with us today, Rosemary Trible, who is our founder and our fearless leader.
Hello.
Welcome, Rosemary.
Thank you. So glad to be with you today.
Well, we're so excited for you to be with us as we gear up for our big 10th anniversary gala celebration. We're hoping today that we can take a look back and have you share with us about how you started Fear to Freedom and some of the key highlights along the way. So without further ado, let me just jump right into our first question. Why is the issue of sexual assault important to you, Rosemary?
It's so important to me because of my own personal experience, but also because of all the women and young men too that I've walked alongside this issue who have been raped or violently assaulted. You know, the statistics are really frightening. 1 in 4 women, 1 in 33 men have experienced some kind of sexual assault, and half of those raped are 18 years old or under. Also, 40% of rapes are never reported. And this is such a big issue, especially on college campuses. And less than 6% of rapists ever spend 1 day in jail. In my own life, what was meant for evil was used for good. And I can honestly say, I would not be the woman I am today if I had not gone through this experience and had this chance to walk with so many others that have suffered with fear. I am so thankful that that has happened in my life. And I thought I might share a little bit of my own experience with you so that you would understand. December 21st, 1975 changed my life forever. I was 25 years old and I had a morning talk show in Richmond, Virginia called Rosemary's Guest Book.
Rosemary's Guest Book.
Yes, I loved it.
Before Oprah. That was before Oprah.
It was the first time they had ever had a talk show. Oh, that's how long ago it was.
That was a while ago.
We're talking about rape, but do you think back in 1975, no one was talking about it.
Yeah.
And I had it for 3 years, and I did a show on sexual assault. I had 2 women who had been assaulted, but their faces were shadowed to protect them. Commonwealth attorney policemen, I got hundreds of letters and calls afterwards. And it just broke my heart, the extent of so many people that had never been able to share the shame that they had experienced. There was an outpouring of pain. Well, it was a week before Christmas, and I needed to do 1 live show and record 3 shows so that I could go home for Christmas for 3 days because a live show goes on every day.
Yeah.
And I felt confident. I went over to the hotel right across the street. I had my notes that I was working on. At 11 o'clock, I went down for coffee and I came back into the room. And when I did, I sat down at the desk and this huge man took me around my neck and began to strangle me. And then put a gun to my head and said, okay, cute talk show host, what do you do with a gun in your head? Well, I had never thought about that when I'd done that show. And this was a rapist that had seen that show and was infuriated that I was trying to help victims. After a night of complete horror, he drugged me back over to the window. And he said, I know who you are. I know where you live, and I promise I will kill you if you tell. And that was a dagger of fear that actually was even worse than the torn body that I had. But the moment he went out that window, I called the police and I called security. And this man was never, ever found. It's so hard to go through something like this because a man that rapes you does not want to destroy you for a night. They want to destroy you for a lifetime. And so I finally called the police immediately. Paul finally got there in the middle of the night and held me. And that began true fear for me. You begin to think, what I could have done differently? What could I have said? Shouldn't have done the show on rape. And shame and guilt become your constant companion. Shame can be called self-hatred aimed at me. And I think
wait, Rosemary, let's hear that again. Shame is
Yes.
self-hatred aimed at me.
At me.
Oh.
And this is one of the only crimes that it is the victim that feels this shame and guilt, no matter how it happened. And that is why we have to work through that as well as the fear so that we can get to freedom. I felt unclean. I felt I couldn't turn off this recorder in my head that kept replaying that. And fear is one of the strongest emotions that we can feel. It can damage our hearts, control our lives, steal our self-worth and self-esteem, especially if it's brought on by sexual violence. I had always been a very trusting and a very hugging person. And now I was driving back and forth to the station and that recorder wouldn't go off. And I felt like there was an ice block around me. I didn't want to be touched. And I realized after 3 months, I had to give up the show. And I told our manager, I'm so sorry. I love what I do, but I've lost Rosemary and I have to go find her. And I think that's the way those that have been assaulted somehow feel. So whatever has maybe caused fear in your life, I hope that you will believe that the cycle of fear can be broken and lost joy can be found again.
Well, Rosemary, that is so powerful. Thank you for sharing your story with us. We can understand then why this issue is so important to you. But how do you think and why do you think it's important for survivors of sexual assault and sexual violence to move from fear to freedom? Because the fear for survivors, like you said, it's paralyzing, it's crippling, it's almost like you can't even move. So that journey from fear to freedom, why is that important? And just in a short synopsis, like I know you wrote a whole book about it. We've got your book here, From Fear to Freedom. You were talking about this way before the Me Too movement. And thank you for your courage, Rosemary, for speaking out and for sharing your story that's helped so many survivors. But how is that? And can you give us how is that possible? Because you said, the person who assaulted you wanted to rob your joy and steal your joy, but you refused. So how is that possible to move from fear to freedom? And why is that important for survivors?
Well, I really learned more about moving from fear to freedom by others that had been sexually assaulted. And I remember as I traveled and talked to other people, there was one woman that was 83 years old. And she told me she had never told anyone until that day that she had been raped in college. And the sadness I felt for her, because all those years, she had been living in fear. Mm-hmm. And actually, silence is the greatest enemy of healing. Because when you keep your story silent, it continues to record. It continues to capture you in this sense of fear. So I remember another woman that I talked to that I was just sharing my story with, and I couldn't believe it. She just began to really weep. And I said, "Are you all right?" And this was like the mayor's wife, not someone that was at all thinking, I was thinking was wounded. And she said, I've just had a flashback that I have never experienced. My husband and I have been married 7 years, and I cry every time we get together physically. And we can't figure it out, and we're going to counseling for it. And she said, when you told me your story, I saw that I had been gang raped by 4 men in college. And I'd blocked that out so much that I never knew it to this moment. And my heart was broken for her But the great thing was being able to understand that you can get through this, that joy can happen to you. Somehow it allowed that memory that had been suppressed, that she was able to come forward and see the grief that had been in her heart all this time. So that's why survivors need to move from fear to freedom. It takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. I don't talk about forgiveness when someone's just been raped, but in some time, forgiveness is also a great key to moving from fear to freedom.
Well, thank you. That is a hard journey, and it can be a long journey. I know as survivors, healing is a journey that it takes time, but it also takes courage. And Rosemary, to you, your courage to me has been such a influence and such a gift in the healing journey, because it does take time, courage, and grace, and everybody is at different points on their journey. But to see
and I
you,
want them to know they're not alone.
yeah, and they're not
That's one of
alone.
the things, you
And
feel so alone.
right, and
And
that
your
joy.
pain makes you not share when you need to.
That's
And so thank you. It's very important to me that they move to freedom.
right. And that to see that joy is possible, because I know, Rosemary, you're one of the most joy-filled people I've ever known. And that's you were always that way.
I wear a joy pin almost every day.
Yeah.
And that's to remind me that my purpose in life is to radiate joy and to help those wounded find their joy. And that has truly made such a difference in my life.
Yes, because that's what you founded Fear to Freedom for us to be the change, to combat sexual violence in all its forms, but also to restore the joy, to support survivors on their healing journey. And now, talking about that, about how we support survivors on their healing journey, Rosemary, how did you come up with the idea of the aftercare kits, and what was the impetus? About 13 years ago, 14 years ago, you wrote your book, you went on a big tour to promote it. You were helping so many people and investing hope in the lives of survivors all through your many years working with students and others. So 11 years ago, 10 years ago, what was the impetus? Why did you say, hey, I want to start an organization and it's going to be Fear to Freedom? And how did you come up with the aftercare kits?
Well, I felt like I wanted to do something. And I know one-on-one was the way that I was at that time expressing it. And I felt called to write the book because of a church service. And he asked two questions. What if you didn't have to be so afraid? And what if you could help someone else not be so afraid? And I knew that was for me. And that was when I seriously wrote the book. But then it was traveling, hearing these experiences of these two I just mentioned, and seeing how much this was out there, that I wanted to do something. But also because of my love of college students, I especially wanted to reach college students. Because if we can transform this issue on college campuses, we can combat sexual violence. And so I wanted to help the victim, but also have a meaningful event that will transform the thinking about those abused. And I had taken many young women, some young men, to the hospital right across from our college. And I realized that every one of their clothing, shoes, socks, everything had to be kept for the evidence for the PERC exam. And the PERC exam allows them to gather the DNA, which is really the one thing that can help convict in a rape case. Mm-hmm. But as I went over there, they were going out in paper scrubs or hospital gowns, unless I brought some clothes. And this just seemed to add to the shame. And so I talked to the forensic nurse, and we went to the administrator, and he said, you all come up with what you think would do. And she helped me. And that's when we came up with the idea of the Fear to Freedom kits. Mm-hmm. And from that came the celebration event, or the Hour to Empower, mm-hmm. because we wanted these college students to really get it, mm-hmm. that they individually could make a difference. Mm-hmm. just by hearing an event where someone spoke about their rape, tenderizing their heart, but then going around and putting all these items in the kit, and then sitting down and writing a personal note. And I think really the freedom bear and the little note are the two most important, if I should say, items in there. The little bear started because for 3 nights I dreamed about this bear. And it came to me how in that moment of fear, but also shame and guilt as they're going through this really difficult exam that takes quite a time, to hold a little teddy bear, I thought might bring comfort to them. And then we developed an idea of how, please bring our freedom bear over, how we might put little dissolving papers in his backpack, turning around.
Oh, he's missing his backpack. His backpack got lost.
Yeah, you can imagine.
He has little sheets of paper.
And so you open up his heart and you put that piece of paper that might say the man's name. It might say something that reminded you of being raped. And then you close it up and you wait a little while. And as you get stronger, as you began to find a little more freedom, you open that up and you put it in water and stir, and it dissolves, just to remind you that you don't have to stay stuck as a victim. You are a survivor. And for them to understand that. And I can't tell you how many people I've had say, I sleep with my bear every night. I've used it for years now, putting different questions in it. And it's just a comforting tool. And then the other side, the writing the note, is so impactful for the students, especially the young men, that sit down and write a personal note to someone who's been sexually assaulted and put it inside their kit. And for that victim that gets it in that night of horror, can you imagine the kindness, almost the unbelief that someone would write me this kind of a note and assure me that I'm going to be all right and that I'm not alone. So those are two of those items that really, really make a difference.
Well, and the kits go to so many different partners. Like there you said, in the hospital, at the, in the forensic exam with forensic nurses, but also for children, with children's doing the same exam with the nurses. So we partner with children's hospitals, but also with community partners, because we have our eye care kits too for survivors of domestic abuse and also intimate partner violence. And the kits have a lot of meaning at different points along the journey for that. So that's such a so important to hear how you came up with that idea, Rosemary. But where did the number 2? Our organization's name is Fear to Freedom. So where did 2 come
from? And when we first began that, every 2 minutes someone was sexually assaulted. But do you know now they say that every 68 seconds someone's assaulted in our country? And that's just impossible.
It's not acceptable. Yeah, it's not acceptable. Like, I know that statistic every 68 seconds is just so appalling. And the thing is, we're so grateful that more people are reporting. More people are going in and reporting. So that is making the number to be 68 seconds. But it's appalling that that is the number. So to have the Hour to Empowers that you helped start, that now we have 7 different topics to educate college students and community groups about, consent and bystander intervention and trauma-informed training, how to support your friends and loved ones who are survivors of sexual violence. That's also so important. But what makes our programs different is that they're interactive, because what you put in the design with the learning component, the Hour to Empower, but then the practical component, as the kits are packed, it just makes it more real. And as the notes are written, it's making it
amazing how much more you learn when you actually do something and it's a hands-on experience. And also domestic violence, as we said, child abuse. Since COVID, the child abuse has raised quite a bit, with so many people kind of isolated more at home. So this issue is going to be around, but we can make a difference. You that are listening can make a difference. in understanding more about this issue, but also being there for someone that may come to you, a friend or a loved one, and say, I've been assaulted. How do you respond? And I always say, listen to their story, just listen and believe them. The hardest thing at the beginning is that if I tell my story, who is going to believe me? And then don't try to fix it. That's not the moment for that. And say you'll be with them through this difficult time if they want you to go with them. But promise you'll be confidential, especially on a college campus. Be willing to say, no one is going to hear this from me. It's safe in my heart for you. And then lastly, you'll be with them when they do need you, or if they do need to talk. So those are just simple ways that you could relate to someone or a friend that has had someone that's been assaulted.
Well, that was my next question. So you already answered it, Rosemary. Well, that brings me back to this, Rosemary. That I think that what you said, one of the key things is to listen. To listen. I think one of the biggest ways we can help survivors who are friends and loved ones, as you shared, is to listen and to believe, because at that time we can't fix it. Some things can't be fixed because it is recovery, and healing is a journey. So thank you for sharing those ways. I hope our listeners are definitely making a note of that. But that brings me to this whole question of joy again. Back to joy, Rosemary, because we shared our mission is to be the change. We talked about how we do that with the students and with community groups, all the places where we're doing our 2 Empowers. But joy, why is joy important to you? And why do you think joy is important to survivors of sexual violence?
Well, there's a difference in happiness and joy. Happiness deals with the circumstances, but joy deals with a very deeper level of emotion, despite the situation. My rape not only tore my body, but it stole my joy. And it was through forgiveness and faith and friends that I was able to get my joy back, and determined to help others to heal as well and move, as we've said, from fear to freedom. Survivors are always going to have that scar. I can't say to someone that's been raped that you will not remember this. It is part of your life. But do with your life in spite of the fact that you were once deeply wounded. And it wasn't fair, it wasn't right, but it did happen. So you search for that joy to overcome, to be an overcomer from what has happened to you, and begin to live your life fully and wonderfully. Joy can be found. And often as we share our pain with others, I know I feel blessed or joyful when I can help someone else deal with the extent of their pain.
Well, and that's something, Rosemary, I know from when you first started Fear to Freedom that really touched me deeply, was that you don't focus on being a victim, because I always would say, oh, we're a victim, or she's a victim, or a victim of sexual violence. But the process of the healing and the focus of Fear to Freedom is that journey to becoming a survivor. And I think that that's where joy can be found along the way, and of the journey. And it's what has really touched my heart so much with Fear to Freedom. Even before I came on the team, as part of the team, I just was always so touched with that. And I hope our listeners are touched with that too, that it is a journey, but we're not called to be victims, we're called to be survivors.
Right.
And your story just so demonstrates that it's something that you can get to the other side. It may take a long time because it is a journey, and that's why we have our kits and all these things to help on the journey. And there's all these other amazing groups too out there helping others on their journey. But that to me is just makes Fear to Freedom such a special have such a special
Make
mission.
it different. I do
Yeah,
believe.
and makes a difference. Yeah, it definitely makes a
When you're
difference. So,
first assaulted, confusion, pain, and shame, seem to initially just fill your heart.
yeah.
And you think, I'll never be the same. I remember thinking that I'll never get over this. But it's amazing. I have had such a joyful life. And I truly believe that this pain does no longer have to control your life. In that very beginning, it does. It does take time. And sometimes you don't even deal with it. The two women I spoke about, one never dealt with their pain, and the other found freedom later in life. And sometimes, especially with children, the memory of that is it kind of goes back in their mind, and it comes out at a later time when they're ready to deal with it. Sometimes it comes out when they go to college and they are living on their own and they're hearing about this happening. And sometimes that will trigger what happened to them as a child and child abuse. So whatever it is, along the way, there are healing steps, but you do not have to stay in that initial pain. And that's the good news.
And that's the good news. You can't move from fear to freedom. So, well, Rosemary, we have just so appreciated your time with us today. I have one last question for you. And again, we're so grateful for all that you've shared. And but this was something I thought might be a good question for you to end on with your time with us. So it's, if you could share something with the survivor who has just been to the emergency room today and taken the forensic exam, what would you say to him or her or they?
I would wait and let them lead somewhat, because sometimes they just need to be listened to. Sometimes they can't talk at all. And your presence can be the strongest thing to help them in that very moment. Sometimes they've been extra difficult time if they needed to share it with the police. That's another part that sometimes takes place during that PERC exam. And to assure them that you are with them in this. The feeling of loneliness is so impactful at that moment you've been raped, because it is so out of your control. And knowing that you are just near them and that you are willing, as I said before, to walk with them. You may have been raped yourself. And often I would tell them, I went through this at 25 years old, but your story is unique to you. And you don't want to go into your story. That's not the time.
No, that's not.
You're to focus and to listen and to love. Focus and listen and love them right where they are. And assure them they're not alone and that you are willing to walk through them, through this pain and through this journey, that they can move from fear to freedom. And our other motto is to be the change. And how wonderful then on these college times, while we're having these hours to empower, I think these students get it, or these community groups that are doing these hour empower. I was able to make a difference. And I'll close with just this. One thing that inspired me to initially tell my story, to write the book and begin Fear to Freedom, was an experience I had in when I was able to go to Calcutta and visit with Mother Teresa, 1996. And I had always admired her as my hero. And I had an opportunity to go and spent days working in the House of the Dying and in the orphanage. But as I met her after 6 o'clock in the morning, having the service that they began the day with, I knelt at Mother Teresa's wheelchair, because she died actually 6 months after I was there. And in that moment, she took my hand in hers and held it. And I felt the wrinkled hands that were so tough from all the world she had tried to heal, picking up babies from the side of the road that had been abandoned and those that were dying. And she told me about the work, and her eyes twinkled. It was like looking into the eyes of liquid love. And as she kind of completed her story about their work, I said, Mother Teresa, how with so much pain and suffering, how do you do this? And I love what she said. She said, we're not called to be successful. We're called to be faithful. And I think now, A Fear to Freedom, that we want to be faithful to be there for those women and men that have been assaulted and to help them through this great trauma. And then I said, well, how can I make a difference? Come to Calcutta, send money. I didn't know what she would say. And instead she said this. She said, go home, Rosemary, and love the person in front of you. Go home and do what is right in front of you. I got choked up. I haven't told this story in a long time. And it was, now's the time to write the book. Now's the time to tell my story and to come do all that I can do to give my heart to helping those that have been so wounded by abuse come to know that they are survivors and they can have a beautiful and a joyful heart and a beautiful and a joyful life.